really new world of information. So you're going to want to buckle up your seatbelts. There will be a little turbulence because it is a complex digital landscape that we are all navigating. So we're so lucky to have Robert Rogers with us. As I shared before, Robert and I first got to know each other through our work in journalism. He is also a UC Berkeley School of Journalism lecturer. He knows a lot about this topic. I am also going to invite for another time our wonderful friends of the library to share about why this topic is so important, and it's even for us to have healthy, vibrant libraries that prop up healthy, vibrant democracies. It's all about getting involved, being engaged, supporting your local public libraries. So can I get someone from the Friends to come up and share a word? The dynamic duo. All right. Go.
Do you want to hold this time? Yeah, it's your turn to hold it. Hi, we're from the Friends of the Library. My name is Jan Bennett, and officially I am the secretary. And this is
Dennis Barley, and officially I'm the president, otherwise known as the Big Cheese.
Yay.
man, he's our man. We're here to let you know that we have funded this event, and we hope that you take advantage of all three of them. We were here for the first one, it was wonderful. But the Friends of the Library do a whole lot more than just this type of thing. We support Jazz in July. We just finished summer reading. I hope you all did the summer reading and have the little flag in your front yard. We are now hosting Authors and Arts, but no, this month is, Hispanic Heritage Month coming up, yes, yeah. So we fund a lot of things. And where do we get that money?
Well, I can fill in there. Let me give you a little history. If you've heard this before, forgive me, but I'm going to say it again. We were formed in 1978 by a group of Livermore citizens who were concerned that after the passage of Proposition 13, the library's budget would be cut. Since 1978, we have raised and given more than $1.1 billion to the library. That is our primary mission, to raise money and support the library. We are an all-volunteer organization. We currently have 32 volunteers working in the bookstore, which I'm sure you're all aware is looking just off the lobby in the library. We raise money in 3 different ways: through membership dues, donations, and sales of donated books. If you have a collection of books you'd like to donate to the library, there's a big donation made out of the parking lot. We encourage you to do that. We also encourage you to go into the bookstore and buy some books. Membership dues are a bargain because they're only $10 a year, and with that you get $10 worth of free books from the bookstore. So it's practically a win-win. So we'd like to invite everyone who is not a member of the Friends of the Library to join. We have application forms on the table. We also, if you'd like to instead make a donation, there's a donation box down there. And we have a website.
We do. There's a little slip of paper there with our website that shows you how to get there.
You can either donate or join on the website. So we make it very easy, very easy. We encourage everyone to donate to the library.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a perfect example of civic engagement right here. Please do follow up if you're interested in becoming a member. Please do give if you can. Just a couple quick announcements. As you can tell, this is being filmed, so we have cameras all around us. If you don't want to be filmed, move to the back. There are some good seats in the fact that will not show up in the video at all, okay? And then please help yourself to the snacks over here. The friends brought us all these snacks, so we want to make sure they get eaten. Without further ado, let's welcome Robert Rodriguez back to the stage. There you go.
Thank you so much, Emily. Appreciate it, and it feels really good to be back here with you today. I want to echo first, before we get into it, I want to echo the Friends of the Library message because I think it's so important, as I've said before. The issue is, it's not overstating it to say that people working together for a cause they believe in are the ones who really change the world. Indeed, they're the only people who really change the world, right? This is what you do. This is how it starts. So I would encourage you not only to be part of what they are doing with this library, but also, most importantly, as we know, information today is cheap. And it goes everywhere, and it goes all over the place. And that stickiness is something that's always in question. The trustworthiness is always in question. Therefore, today and tomorrow, and we'll see this in the lecture, what really makes communication valuable is trust, identity, and connection. And so when you tell someone else, your friend, your family, your neighbor, about the great work this library is doing, and you ask them to join and be part of this, that's the most powerful pitch. That's the most powerful communication of all. That outdoes even the slickest advertising campaign. So if you believe in this library, reach one and teach one. With that, I also want to start off. We're going to have a big, lively Q&A session at the end, of course. But I was inspired to ask a Q&A right in the beginning by one of our wonderful attendees. Let's get a show of hands. Let's understand this a little bit. Let's talk about news diet, which is going to be part of our lecture series anyway. But raise your hand if you subscribe to a newspaper. Well, the world's problems are solved. Let's go ahead and break for tonight. No, that's tremendous. I understand that this is a particularly select group that's not necessarily representative of the cross-section of America today. How do we consume that news? Do we read it in print or do we read it online? Do we get there through a social media channel, Google, or the website directly? How about in print? What do we do? Who reads the print newspaper? Who visits their newspaper website on a daily basis? Who finds some of their news, their trusted news information through the newspaper's social media channel? A few, terrific. And how about the kind of newspaper that we're using? How about international papers, New York Times, Washington Post to a lesser extent, maybe LA Times? Who subscribes to one of those? Terrific. And how about local or regional papers? East Bay Times, Livermore, local news. Tremendous, tremendous. Well, I think that we should all reach one and teach one with those messages as well, because a lot of good things are happening in this room. And I realize that the education and the discussion we have tonight is not going to be lost upon us because we're all such experts, but it can help us to discover things we didn't know and also be able, again, to be inspired and outfitted to share with those around us about what we think is important in the world today. Speaking of today, that's not today, right? That's more than 100 years ago. Does anyone know who that is? Well, that's Yeats, a really incredible poet of his time, William Butler Yeats, dark Irish, very moving. And he was writing some of his most famous work in 1919. And imagine we are in 1919 today, fresh off a world war, a global conflagration that totally upset the nation-state system that was thought to be the one of the future of stability, totally destroyed all those notions, burst apart the ideas of how people would relate to one another and how they would relate to the state. At the same time, a global pandemic gripping the world. Tell me if we've seen this before. Killing millions, including Yeats's own pregnant wife convalescing near death, as he writes the following words. Before he gets there, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Miscommunication. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Fast forward to the end, and what rough beast is this? Its hour come round at last. Right. Very beautiful, very dark, and in my mind, something that's very topical even for today. The names are different, the concepts have changed, but the basic idea remains the same. Today's a tough time. The views of this room notwithstanding, we have a tremendous decline in public institutions of all kinds in this country. A decline in trust in public institutions. At the same time, a deep polarization of our body politic of people that we have not seen before, I don't think, at least in this way. A polarization so great is not just about differences of opinion, but it's about differences of the nature of reality itself. Empiricism is actually under siege through, paradoxically, the flow of rapid information. Information of a volume and a velocity and a virality that's never been made possible before, only thanks to the technology of today. And so what we have is the sinews of our society that keep us together, the belief in our common mission, right? Who we are as Americans, and this is being faced in other countries as well. We'll get into that. They're on the verge of snapping. People are retreating into silos. They're not understanding one another, not talking to one another. Learning has ceased to some great degree. People aren't in discover mode nearly as much as they're in defend mode now. And that is absolutely prioritized in the online spaces that today are serving as our public spaces. So today we got to talk about our own time. It's a century hence. And most important, we got to start by understanding what are democracy's key ingredients and how are we going to improve them moving forward. Trust in institutions, public education, a shared sense of empirical reality, and a free and fair flow of information. We need those things to sustain a democracy in whatever degree. But there's no question that all of those things are under assault. And in particular, our current news ecosystem, it's directly disrupting every one of those pillars. Social media plays a role in this, but media in general as well. How can we have public education that's successful if our children are being dosed constantly with information on social media that's making them uptight, freaked out, without attention span, worried about this or that? How can our public institutions survive that onslaught? At the same time, how can things like news media survive when everyone becomes a publisher? Every platform has equal weight. And then the public square that we have today, the social media square, it incentivizes the viral content, the untrue content, the sensational content, the triggering content, the kind of content that erodes our other pillars of our society. And we see the manifestations of this problem in the results. We as a country, as a world, are facing incredible challenges today. Climate change, immigration, education, disease, proliferation of nuclear weapons, strong men running roughshod over human rights in other parts of the world. And what are we faced with over and over again? Our systems are unable to respond. The gears of our democracy are grinding to a halt. Is social media, is the media itself the only culprit? No, but it's one of them, certainly. The declining trust in institutions laid us bare for this moment, weakened us for this attack. And we're going to find out more about that. When we look at longitudinal studies, we see how things have changed and what made us vulnerable to the situation we're in. But the situation still remains. The inputs are still there. And the opportunities to fight back have never been more apparent. So, it's important to know that not all is lost. We got to think back, first of all. Think back to the hope. 20 years ago, imagine what would happen if I was here tonight, 20 years ago, talking about the internet and transparency and information and news and free information flow and connectivity. Imagine if I was talking about that 20 years ago, because a lot of people did all over the country and world. And what do you think was the basic tenet, the basic point that they were making? Was that one that they would use a William Butler Yeats stanza to talk about? No. It was amazing when you look back on it. Look back at the published studies, look back at the content that was coming out at that time. It was almost unabashed euphoria. It was, this is what's going to make the future great. No government can get away with anything when we have this on them, right? No one will be able to lie, right, when I can just cross-check that and find that, right? Why would anyone hate each other or not understand someone else when we can be connected at any time? We can always converse. That was the thought. That was what our best minds were projecting forward, and it didn't happen. Human nature got in the way. Technology got in the way. Profits got in the way as well. And we're in a situation that's much, much different than the one that we had prophesized. But that said, as we talked about last time with the cycle of history, we've seen this movie before to some degree. We know that the genius of the American experiment is our ability to confront challenges, and after, to use the Churchill phrase, after trying all the wrong things in America, we always arrive at the right one. But that's the genius, the adaptability of this country, the adaptability of its people, our ability to confront problems and come up with new solutions. And we are desperate to do that in this moment in time. With that, let's bring up the clip, please, Andrew.
It is my desire, if not my duty, to try to talk to you journeymen with some candor about what is happening to radio and television. And if what I say is responsible, I alone am responsible for the sad matter. Our history will be what we make it. And if there are any historians about 50 or 100 years from now, and there should be preserved the kinescopes of 1 week of all 3 networks, they will there find, recorded in black and white and in color, evidence of decadence, escapism, and insulation from the realities of the world in which we live. We are currently wealthy, fat, comfortable, and complacent. We have a built-in allergy to unpleasant or disturbing information. Our mass media reflect this. But unless we get up off our fat surpluses and recognize that television in the main is being used to distract, delude, amuse, and insulate us, then television and those who finance it, those who look at it, and those who work at it may see a totally different picture too late. This instrument can teach. It can illuminate, and yes, it can even inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it towards those ends. Otherwise, it is merely wires and lights in a box. Good night, and good luck.
Perhaps not the most upbeat dinner party guest, but someone that we want to listen to, right? I don't know if anyone's seen that movie, Good Night and Good Luck. A tremendous film. Check it out. Really inspiring and such a brilliant screenplay. Extremely wise and historically accurate, as well as a tremendous performance by the lead actor. I think his name is David Strathairn, as Edward R. Murrow, one of the great journalists of our time and someone who spoke truth to power when it was extremely dangerous. And he had the cachet and the credibility to do so. Without humans to use it, it's just wires in a box. And I believe that's the same case today. Now, there may be a wrinkle here that's significant, but ultimately technology is it's inert. It's only what we as humans opt to do with it. It's only as good as our systems, our people working with it. Now, we do face a future that we can't completely capture. That would be with a sentient AI, right? And that equation may change. But before that happens, we can still create those guardrails. And we can still think about what we can do to sustain and strengthen our institutions for what may be a coming inevitability. Before I move on to the next one, I also want to introduce to everyone, I know we well remember, Andrew Melendez is my intern. He's joining us tonight. He'll have something to share before. Thank you, Andrew, for your tremendous work on the slideshow this evening. And lastly, the future is good. I believe in it because I see young people doing great things all the time. Andrew at St. Mary's College here in our region has created a new student group called Bridge USA, where he brings, his whole mission is to create that space where people on different ends of the spectrum, politically, ideologically, culturally, can get together and work on solutions and strengthen the bonds. Andrew and his cohort are emphatically in discover mode, not defend mode. And that's where we need to be as Americans, scholars, and people that believe in democracy. So with that, let's take a quick jaunt into the social labyrinth that you might have seen yourself. I'm gonna be my own guinea pig for this part. This is what I went through. This is the ringer that I've seen. And it's only gonna get more complex. Well, here we are. What's this? Well, it's a morning in spring. I get up, I'm gonna take a run, and I have my headphones in. I've already scanned some of my news items, and I get a DM, a direct message, from a friend of mine from high school into my Instagram account. Oh, wow, good to hear from him. And what does he say to me? He says, look at this. And I see it. And then he sends me this. Let's see that thing. This was the one that caught my attention. Newsweek. Terrific. I grew up reading Newsweek. I love Newsweek, right? Oh, it's not quite the same Newsweek that we remember, is it? So I open this up and I see this article from Newsweek. It seems credible, my goodness. So there's something wrong about the scientific community with COVID. And this is an extensive article written by Kevin Bass, who is identified here as MSMD PhD student medical school. Okay, interesting. Has a nice picture there. He looks intelligent. Maybe I should read the article. So I look into it a little bit. I start reading and it's not passing the snuff test for me right away. And what do I do with this? Well, right away, I note that the article came as a link in Instagram from another account. Please go back to the other one. It came from this account. This is the account that sent me that. Now, 210,000 followers, that's a big number. Wow, that sounds credible, that sounds interesting. At the time, it was only 168, and that was a big number too. So this is doing that. And then I look at this, I say, what is it? Top ranked nutrition podcast, Peak Human, interesting. Sapien Diet, whatever that, owner of Eat Nose to Tail, okay? Pre-order Food Lies film. There was some different stuff in there when I read this a few months ago. So I see this and I see the Newsweek article. And now I'm interested. Now I want to know more. Oh, it also was the Eat Nose No Tail. At the time, it said that it was a Texas food company, and it also described this person, this account, as a rancher. I then looked at some of the clips. We can't scroll on that now, but I looked at some of the clips and it was loaded with stuff like Joe Rogan podcasts and various things about COVID, anti-vaccine stuff was definitely there, and a lot of stuff that was really unconventional in terms of human nutrition. That's interesting. My friend, by the way, is a fitness professional, and that's why he sent this to me, and he believes in this apparently. So let's go back to that Newsweek article. There it is, and now I begin my lateral research. Lateral research, crucial, right? What we want to do when we get information that is not particularly persuasive, when it's not coming from the trusted source that we already have, we're going to talk about curating your news feeds and so forth as well. What we want to do right away is start doing lateral research. In other words, we're going to use the technology that can be so powerful in fooling us, and we're going to use it to find the truth or find something more approximating the truth. And so that means taking information and plugging it into different systems, the Google search engine being the most powerful. And that's what I did. So first of all, I realized that Newsweek is not the Newsweek that I grew up with. I knew that already, but I wanted to do some deeper research into it. And what did I find out about Newsweek? Well, Newsweek has folded as a print magazine that we all knew and loved that existed since the 50s, I believe, or at least the 60s. A very credible news magazine, well thought of, sort of a junior partner at a time, right? Which was from Life. And now what we see is the diminution of those journalistic institutions we've come to rely on. This is Exhibit A, Newsweek, and what's happened to it. So Newsweek isn't a print magazine, but Newsweek makes big bucks, I find out. Why? Because it's an online magazine that gets 30 to 40 million clicks a month. That's a big number. That's worth money. Eyeballs are worth money. Our attention is the commodity now. Now, how are those numbers driven? Are they driven with staid and solid reporting about the issues of the day? No. Newsweek is now sensational. Newsweek is solicitous. Newsweek is hyped. Is Newsweek true? Probably not in a lot of respects. Certainly, Newsweek is divorced from the ethics that were so concrete in its original iteration. So now I got to find out so I know Newsweek has problems. I know this website or that Instagram account is a little weird. Now I want to know about this author. Who's this author? That's his byline. And that sounds pretty smart, but it also sounds just a little bit off. So I look into this. Who's this Kevin Bass person? So I have to plug it into all the social media posts. I have to go into Google. And what do I discover? But Kevin Bass has 67,000 Twitter followers, probably more today. And he says that he's an MD, PhD student. Also, he notes that he's a centrist. This is on his Twitter page. A centrist with nonpartisan takes on health, longevity, and nutrition. Interesting, right? Oftentimes, we know that slapping on a label like that is the kind of thing that we do when we're maybe the opposite of that. And that's what I think. Why does one doth protest so much, right? I'm a centrist. Well, that's calling into question your centrism right away. Then I do more lateral research and I find out that this person, Kevin Bass, or maybe I'm already fooled in calling him a person, right? I don't know. He also has bylines other places, like the big one would be the Tennessee Star. Does anyone know what the Tennessee Star is? Well, I didn't know either until I found out. Yeah, oh, tremendous. So it's Tennessee, yeah, and it's Star. Well, Star sounds pretty good. There was a Washington Star in the 70s and early 80s, and there's been a lot of, prestigious and robust newspapers that have called themselves a Star over the years. So that sounds okay. This layout looks pretty good. All right, interesting. So I do some lateral research on the Tennessee Star. I'm going to look in Google. I'm going to look in my New York Times search feed. I'm going to look on my social media search feeds. And what I find out is the Tennessee Star was launched by some people I've never heard of. And then I find out those people are coming up in the same place with the Tea Party movement and the fundraising operations. Oh, okay. Interesting. Now it's coming into clearer focus. The publication, then I go to the Wikipedia page, which has, it has its own faults, but also has documented sources. It's interesting. There's some credibility there. And I find out that the publication has been compared to Breitbart, and that one of the founders, Patrick Leahy, is also funded by influential Republican donors. Of course, the Tennessee Star, in its About section, claims that it's unbiased and neutral and so forth. So, what do we have here? This story by Kevin Bass has all the patina of legitimacy, and it's surely reached hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And it makes what seem to be credible, nuanced, sober claims. And after all, it's done by a doctor, right? And my friend is completely convinced on this. Thank you. He is in there. Now, who is my friend? Well, my friend is in his mid-40s, an intelligent man, a fitness professional. I grew up with him. And he was nothing like the person he's become today. In the last 5 years, my friend has been what we might call in different contexts, radicalized, right? His consumption of faux news content across all these different platforms, and what he's done, by the way, is unwittingly surrounded himself. He's curated faux news all over. He has literally created a silo where he just feeds himself lies all the time. And these are lies with ideological and profit motives put together. And so today, my friend, a reasonable person, by all accounts, once before, now refuses all vaccines, insists COVID is a hoax by the government or a Chinese ruse, eats no vegetables or whole grains, and insists that it's rational to subsist on raw meats solely and so forth. This is the kind of thing that is happening to millions of people across the country. 10 years ago, when social media really was coming to the fore, there was a huge amount of worry and study about what it meant in the Muslim world, right? During that time, post 9/11, right? While we have forces all over these areas, we were worried about the power of the internet to radicalize young youth, right? And to radicalize them into terror attacks and so forth. We recognize the power of these information systems to literally lead people to their deaths. These systems are also absolutely powerful enough to lead people in America to believe and to support almost anything. This is the power that we're dealing with. This is the gift and the curse. I call it a gift because, of course, who doesn't want all the information in the world at their fingertips, right? Who doesn't want to be able to go to any PubMed article and be able to learn more about their health, be empowered, to know about information across the globe anytime? We have that power, but using it properly is becoming increasingly difficult. So, we want to dive into 3 main issues again today. What is the media today? What has this amorphous beast become? Who owns it? We want to know who consumes what are the trends and what people are doing in terms of their consumption habits, and what is that doing to the way that they interact in space within our democracy. We also want to know why today's disinformation, misinformation landscape is truly an existential threat to not only our democracy, I'd say to our world. This is not just an American problem. We will get into some foreign circumstances and what's gone on there, and that will help inform us here. But this is something that it appears to be playing a role in authoritarianism, being on the march worldwide. And of course, most importantly, probably, hamstringing democratic republics' institutions' abilities to interact or to counteract. The media, right? We've all heard this phrase. Let's get that Gallup poll up here, please, Andrew. Great. What does the media mean today? Well, certainly it's negative, right? That's the connotation. And that has been the case for a while. That was pre-social media. But social media has only enhanced and deepened these feelings. This is really fascinating data. This is longitudinal data that is really instructive for a situation like this. So America's trust in media remains record low. What's the story being told by this phenomenal data that we've got since 1973? Now we did our big history piece in the last lecture, and we talked about the various rises and pinnacles and denouements of the media before. And we talked about the mid-70s as a bit of a glory period, right? The aftermath of Watergate, the youthful infusion into news, the belief in mission, and the belief by the public in general in the value of this institution, right? The media was there to protect people from corrupt government, to protect people from bad things happening in their community, right? That was a very positive connotation. You see it reflected right here at around 1976 at near 80%. Wow, what a nice time. Now, at the same time, there were people down here, the 2%ers, the 1%ers, right? We probably met people like that back in the analog days, right? They shut out the world. They didn't believe in any of the things they were seeing. But we didn't pay them much mind, right? And they didn't have much of a platform either. They might get their letter published to the editor once in a while, but that might have been the extent of it. And then, of course, there's the great middle, right? Sort of, not very much, a little bit, but the bulk of people here, right? So what have we seen since? Really troubling times. But this proves, by the way, social media is right about here, right? Digitization of news is occurring right around here for the most part, right? All the websites are coming up. The circulation begins to decline. Now, there were many things going on right here we talked about last time, I won't get into it today, that eroded trust. But we see that we have some major, now, what's different here? Big drop, big rise, yeah, right? There's this really powerful partisan symbiosis with this, right? And that's troubling. And it's not just troubling because there's a partisan public that is attached to this, that's their trust in government is rising and falling based on whether their guy or gal is in, right? That is bad enough, but it can't be disentangled from the work of our leadership, right? Leaders in government, they're capitalizing on this, right? They're using it to their partisan advantage. And that's particularly irresponsible, particularly damaging. And in my opinion, what we have here is when we have the distrust in institutions of government generally and the media, because we're going to see other institutions of government, and I don't want to give it away too much, but it's not going to contradict our thesis at all. What we see is this potent marriage of those two things might be particularly dangerous moving forward. 2022 Gallup poll, some of the best data that we have very recently. 70% of Democrats and only 14% of Republicans trusting the media. 27% of independents, right? We're going to see this kind of partisan tracking on institutions of all stripes. That's the kind of thing that you see in much less stable states than our own, right? That's the kind of thing that you see in revolutionary republics where things are changing so rapidly, where people only believe that they're going to get a fair shake if their person is in office or their party is in office. And that necessarily leads to not only a lack of trust, but it goes down from there. Fear, violence, disassociation with, a lack of belief in. All those things come with that. So what about media? What about this idea of media? What is it? Well, interestingly, today, media has changed drastically. Is there more concentration? Yes, there is, right? There's like 6 or 7 companies that own most of the mainstream media we have. But those aren't the most important media anymore. That's the big story. The story is that, yes, it's true that in the 70s or the 60s, there were more ownership stakes in media organizations. There has been a consolidation since. The 1987 Act, certainly that deregulation helped to enhance that. But when we're talking about all those media companies, the problem is those aren't the ones that are really wagging the dog anymore, right? We're not counting Facebook and Google and X and the others in that pie. And those have emerged as the most powerful forces in terms of the information that we get, in terms of volume and velocity and virality. They're so powerful, and they're so new, and they're so sophisticated, and our level of data about them is so, the paucity is so untenable that Zuckerberg can go in front of the Senate like he did a few years ago and say 99% of the content on Facebook is authentic content, right? Did that pass the smell test for anyone? No. Because what he wanted to do was definitely segment the fake news, the disinformation. He wanted to segment that into a small little piece that we can deal with. But it wasn't true. We know it was far more widespread. Now, There are some people who might, there's some data that suggests it is not quite as widespread as some of us think, but we'll get into that as well. It also shows us some hope. There might be some surgical options that can help enhance this. In other words, if it's not quite everywhere, if it's not quite coming from everywhere, then there might be something that can be addressed. One more brief note about the power of the platform. The power of the platform being able to provide disinformation, misinformation, giving everyone a platform regardless of scruples, ideas, and so forth. I can recall 20 years ago sitting in a college lounge at my undergraduate university and reading the student paper, and a young man, a fellow student, came up to me and said, "Put that down. That's all propaganda. That's garbage." And he thrust a little pamphlet into my hand. Okay, opened it up, and what did I discover? This is pre-social media, pre-internet news for the most part. I discovered that 9/11 is an inside job, it's fake. AIDS is actually not really what it's supposed to be. I don't remember exactly what it was, but various other conspiracy theories are being locked in, right? And this was from someone this is my first exposure to someone named Lyndon LaRouche. Anyone know who that is? Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. I thought it was great. I look at the pamphlet, I tossed it aside, and I went back to my own business, right? Credibility, 0. Impact, 0. Well, maybe not quite 0. I still remember it. So there's something there, right? But influence, very, very low, right? Easily cast aside. And that was what LaRouche had to do, the hand-to-hand pamphlet. Everybody that wanted to come up with these radically outside the mainstream ideas, they had to resort to that kind of low-tech distribution model. That's not the case anymore, right? Now the LaRouchians are driving the power bus that has all of the most sophisticated algorithms, mind control, technology available. They're aiming it right at our heads. And they're getting a lot of people, and they're pulling them deep into this abyss. And that's just one form. It's not just that most extreme. There's a whole ecosystem of distruth, right? And it's a mix, again, a potent mix of profit, partisanship, and also just growth, influence, power, right? If I go to the social media feeds today, and I'll see the Washington Post, 6 million followers, Facebook, right? The New York Times, a higher number. I can go to Ben Shapiro, media personality, 10 million followers. Ben Shapiro's new venture, it's called the Daily Caller, Daily Wire, much, much more, right? So look at this democratization of the platforms of information. And so on the one hand, wonderful, democratization. We watched the news meeting of the Washington Post from 1976's All the President's Men, and there were some things we liked, but we also noted that, hey, that was a whole gaggle of white men sitting around every day across the country deciding what news was, what we needed to know. That's problematic as well. But this new model, this new ability, it opens up the opportunity for everyone, but that lets in the bad as well as the good. I don't want to pick on Ben Shapiro too badly. He's very talented broadcast media, but what about his ethics? What about his motives? What about what he's trying to do? Is it just about the public good? Is it just about giving people fair and impartial information? Absolutely not. Let's not fool ourselves. He wants to make a lot of money, that's good, but he also, and that's okay. It also, much worse, he really wants to further a political agenda, right? And he wants to do it under a guise of being something else. We have laws in this country about campaign finance and about who's funded by what. We have that for a reason. And this is another way to circumvent that with the democratization of this technology. So the New York Times is still there, still doing good work, but its influence is waning tremendously. And in particular, it has almost zero influence, maybe even a counter influence on a smaller but growing segment of our society, right? It's amazing what, in a country of 330 million people, what deep polarization, what an era of untruth, of disassociation with empirical fact. It's amazing what that can do when it's homed in on 30 million people or 40 million people, right? What kind of damage can be done in a republic like ours when we do that, right? Well, it's only 10% of the population. Well, that's a huge number. And these folks can make a massive difference. And we saw it most strikingly, I believe, with COVID, right? In so many ways, our response, our ability to respond, to save lives, hamstrung by disinformation. It's not a surprise nor an accident that the WHO, United Nations organizations, and many others declared disinformation the public health crisis of the day, because it was. That's what cost lives. Convincing people not to trust the experts, right? Which was easy to do after the erosion in public institutions had already occurred. So what we know now is also that this partisan fusing, I can't get into the false equivalency, right? I want to do one thing that's going to point the finger at one side, and then I want to do another thing that's going to say that that's important for all of us to know. Okay? What we know based on the data we have, and the data is not perfect, and we'll get into this because places like Facebook especially, Facebook is the #1 offender on this, are really, really secretive with their algorithms, with their data, right? X has been, formerly Twitter X, to their credit, they have been a little more forthcoming, according to the researchers that I've been reading. But Facebook is very secretive with their secret sauce, because it's powerful, and it makes a lot of money, a lot more than X does, by the way. And what we know, based on the data we have been able to gather, is this isn't equal. This isn't equal. In 2016 and 2020, 90% of the partisan fake news that we saw, right? The disinformation campaign, it was on the right, okay? Now that doesn't mean that there's not liars and swindlers and people who are trying to make you believe things on the left. There are, absolutely. But this is where it's being used right now and being very effective. And it's, again, it's married to the structure. The party is behind it. Everybody's into it. And it's really working because of that. But that's not to blame it. That's only to say the technology is so dangerous. The technology is so powerful. The gun is sitting on the table, right? And even though the left isn't picking up the gun and shooting me right this moment in that torture metaphor, it could be, right? It could be used by any side. It could be used by anyone trying to do anything. It just so happens that's what it's being used at today. And so we really have to get off of that partisan thing. We have to look at it analytically and scientifically and understand this isn't just about getting people to be more progressive or something with their online social media feeds. This is about understanding how to use dangerous technology and putting safeguards in place and understanding how to regulate what's become the most powerful public square that we have ever seen. Now, maybe, I say ever seen, maybe, maybe the Catholic Church in the 15th century with the only books in the world, maybe that could be similar, right? Maybe that could be more. But this is really special, really powerful, and it's certainly faster, cheaper, and more pervasive. Now back to we can get there. We can fix, there's things to fix here. The studies we have show that the COVID pandemic, right, and the disinformation campaign around it, which was tremendous and robust, especially in this country, where did it come from? How big? How big was the operation? Anybody know? Anybody have an idea? Just a wild guess? Well, it surprised me tremendously because I thought it was much more widespread and orchestrated. But it turns out 12 accounts, 12 social media accounts accounted for the bulk of all COVID disinformation. In other words, that was the source. The spigot was powerful. And it spewed out, and then it went viral. The virality is so important, right? So on the one hand, we have this major danger of Why do we have these systems in place, the most powerful communication systems we've ever seen? Why are they suited to elevate this kind of dangerous information, right? Disinformation. That's number one. We have to work on that score. But then on the other hand, on the positive side, we say only 12, right? So in other words, the bulk of the problem could be plugged, right? Now, granted, it might be a whack-a-mole, it might emerge elsewhere. But that does suggest something more manageable than infinity, right? That's very powerful. The last point I want to make on ownership of the media today and yesterday is it's not all it's cracked up to be in terms of importance, right? Now, in the old days, the old media, the old systems, they relied on an advertising model that's been destroyed, that's not going to come back, probably, right? And that advertising model, that incentivized a certain communication, a certain cultural way of being, right? A certain feedback loop. And it was, in the big picture, somewhat conservative. Not politically conservative, but conservative in the sense of, let's not burn down our society because we're all advertising and investing and so forth, right? So in other words, that advertising model that funded these massive institutions, it incentivized a staid and stolid and intelligent, impartial discourse. And we don't have that anymore, right? And so for all the ills of that model, it did provide us some stability, right? At the same time, the idea of ownership and censorship, or ownership and propaganda, that's something that gets bandied about, but there's not a lot of data that has ever suggested that that's made much of a difference, at least in the post-20th century. We did talk about the partisan press of the early days, and we know it was an issue there, of course. But we don't see a lot of data that shows direct control or censorship based on ownership. And I would just say, as a former news professional myself for 10 years at a variety of papers, and Emily can attest to this, I'm sure as well, we never saw direct censorship, right, based on ownership. It just never happened, right? So that bogeyman might be a little overstated, at least in the eyes of many. In other words, ownership matters, but it's not the whole ballgame, right? We can know it, but let's not pretend that just by knowing who the owners are, we can decide what's good and bad and how to fix it. Let's go to slide 6, please, Andrew. Oh, yeah. We've seen this. Now let's talk a little bit about news diet. I talked earlier about, waking up and getting slid into my DMs this disinformation and having to go down that rabbit hole, right? And that was instructive. That was good. Do that. Do your lateral research. And we're going to talk about techniques and tools more so in the next lecture. But what do we do? What are our news diets? We should always be auditing them, looking back on them, deciding where we can make changes, make it better. What's mine? Well, I'll wake up and typically I'll go on Facebook, I'll go on Twitter, I will go to my curated news feed on X, which I like very much. I've made a feed that includes all of the reputable news organizations that I want to see. And by the way, these news organizations are changing over time. Now there's more nonprofit news, right? There's more news coming from different models, right? There's some that are very good, some that are more academic, some that have a particular slant or a point of view. Often not partisan, often issue-oriented. The news ecosystem is more diverse. And in some ways that can be a good thing. I also like to read SF Gate, Washington Post, and sometimes I go on my New York Times app. Sometimes I read a little bit in the paper when I'm feeling particularly leisurely that morning. And sometimes I go to their social media feeds and I see stuff there as well, right? But the key is that I'm directly managing, and I'm thinking about it pretty regularly, directly managing my news feeds on all my platforms. Now, does that mean that I don't look at, who do I include on there, right? I include Fox News. I do include Ben Shapiro, right? I want to see what else is going on there. But within, it's sort of like whatever fad diet you think of, right? A lot of people, and by the way, note the extreme here as well, right? In our politics, in our culture, in our ideas, in our diets, in our exercise, right? The algorithms favoring the extreme everywhere. So now, the ones who get the most likes are the ones who say, just eat raw livers all day, right? Or don't ever touch meat, just eat these vegetables, or this color fruit, right? The algorithm prioritizing extremism in all facts of life, all facets of life. That's a very concerning introduction to our culture. But with the news diet, just like those, if you diversify that news diet, you can be healthy. Just like I might be able to be healthy with some meat and some vegetables and some of this and some of that. I think that the analogy holds, and I think that it's wise, and I think that a diversity in inputs of information can really can gird you against the disinformation that occurs. And then once you spot disinformation from a particular source, then your trust should be eroded in that forever. You might want to delete it, I don't know. But that should really matter. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter very much to current news consumers. We'll get that. According to 2022 Pew Research data, okay, this is very important, 80% of Americans get news often from a smartphone. Barely 30% from television. Radio and print are an even smaller fraction. Again, this very august body here tonight notwithstanding. Just 8% of Americans getting news from print. 60% get at least some of their news from social media, with similar numbers saying they get their news from search and apps. 76% of millennials getting their news from social media. 67% of seniors age 65 or over getting their news from digital devices. 1/4 of adults daily, 25%, getting their daily news from YouTube. This one really shocked me, right? This is new. That was not the case 2 years ago, right? And I will go ahead and get out over my skis and say, I bet all those numbers are a little low, right? I bet a lot of people don't want to admit those habits, right? That's how these kinds of surveys tend to work. And we've seen the fallibility of polls in our recent lives, of course. Here's where I get really concerned. Ages 18 to 29 prefer social media to all other digital news sources, okay? 60% of those users expect their news to be inaccurate. 60% expect inaccuracy in their news. They don't believe in it, but they do it anyway. Now, I could spin that positive, and I could talk about the great hoax that we talked about of the Batman on the moon of 1836. I could do that, and how people weren't really ruffled by that, but I won't. I don't believe that. I believe this is really concerning, right? When people are, it's not about wanting to be entertained. It's about looking at stuff and not really caring if it's accurate or not. It's about entertainment might play some role, but more important, what it probably means, I'm going to theorize here, I'm going to jump way ahead of the data, it means they're looking for stuff that they agree with already. And that is very troubling for the future of our democracy, our discourse. At its fundamental level, the news ecosystem today has degraded the quality of discourse that we need to sustain a democracy. That's why the pillars of democracy are under assault. That's why they're being eroded from the bottom. And that's why we have to be tremendously concerned about how we can right this ship moving forward. Let's go to slide 6, please. Now let's learn a little bit about ourselves, right? Why does this stuff work? Why is Facebook so successful? Why has it become the most powerful public square and news information delivery service of all time? And the others play a role too. You know, when I talk about the big tech, really, I'm really talking about Facebook and Google at this point. And by Facebook, I mean Meta, which owns Instagram, which is a very powerful tool, very powerful platform. X is there, but it's smaller. With that, we go to the Bertrand Russell quote. No, let's go back, Andrew. I apologize. Yep. So let's learn about ourselves. Why is it that we're susceptible to this? How can we be less susceptible moving forward? Right? These are the big 12. The ones that I could glean. There are others. You could sandwich these into multi-part ones. You could make it the big 10, whatever. But those are all there. The mammalian brain, right? That's the key. We've evolved over millions of years to seek to know danger, to react to danger. Our trigger systems kept us alive for the vast majority of human evolution. But today, those are the kinds of triggers that allow us to be susceptible to information we see on social media, right? We aren't hardwired to safeguard democracy. We're hardwired to be able to get signals and react in a pre-technology era. The social media has been here since 2009. The tech's been here since 1995. But really what we're talking about is where we've gone in the last 200 years is more so than the last 100,000 years combined. And we know how fast our evolution evolves, and our brains are obviously built for the plains or the forest or wherever else. They're not built to be sitting in front of the computer. Psychologist Daniel Goleman first used the term amygdala hijacking in his 1995 book, Emotional Intelligence, and why it can matter more than IQ. Now, he refers to a situation, the amygdala is that portion of our brains that reacts to danger, that reacts to triggers. It's focused on fears and cravings and keeping us alive. So what we do when we think about that, we know this massive and incredibly complex technological machine is aimed right at it, and it's lighting it up all the time. And children, by the way, are particularly susceptible. Seniors, oftentimes, who don't have a grounding in this technology can be susceptible. People of all ages can be susceptible. But what's really crucial is understanding how to avoid it and how to recognize its usage. And what I would say about that in particular is when you're reading information on whatever platform and it's immediately making you angry, afraid, freaked out, you got to show somebody, that's exactly the time. Because we're all susceptible. I'm susceptible to this too. All of us are, right? It happens. We can't educate ourselves out of this completely, right? We can give ourselves tools to modify and to be able to mitigate, but it's there. So when you feel that way, that's the time to step away and take a deep breath and say, this is really distressing. Now let's do some lateral research. Is this true or not? Number 2, cognitive dissonance. I think we all probably are pretty familiar with this. Very, very powerful, right? This idea, this is about what we invest in our thoughts, right? And when we're confronted with new thoughts, how that is something that makes us feel distressed, unwanted, unpowerful, whatever, right? And this has been the bane of educated society, modern society, since the beginning, right? Aristotle, more than 2,000 years ago, said that the mark of the educated man, he said man, we're talking about, of course, gender neutral now, but the mark of the educated human is to be able to hold two thoughts in their mind at once and to be able to try to reconcile them, right? He also said a lot about things like rationality and unexcitability and the golden mean and modesty, right? Those are all the kinds of things that in the days of the ancient Greeks, they thought that education and their society was girding them against. That's what brought them out of this stage into the stage where they could sit in the Parthenon and have a democratic discussion. Confirmation bias, huge, right? Maybe the most powerful one. Maybe my personal favorite. Maybe the one that's highest on my hit list. Just terrible, right? Always on guard against this, right? I'm always susceptible to this. Every one of us is. When we believe a certain thing, and the social media companies are extremely powerful at this. They know us better than we know ourselves. based on our activities online, right? That can have great benefits, right? It might have tremendous health applications in the future, right? It's going to know exactly what my physiological response is to certain stimuli. And there could be applications there that could provide me medicines, interventions, technologies that could keep me healthy and alive. But at the same time, it's also going to know exactly what story is going to make me do something. And that's extremely powerful. Just a quick aside, I don't want to get too dark. We're going to go into this in the next lecture as well, but this is where AI comes in to a great degree that I'm very concerned about. This is why we have to get the guardrails in place now. This is why we need to be working with our partners, stakeholders, leaders. We're going to have the whole toolbox next lecture about what we need to do to go advance our democracy, because think about it like this. Every society, every place, every person, every world that's ever existed, right? In our minds, in our figments, in reality. They've all been created, sustained, enhanced, and ultimately toppled by stories, right? By information, by the things that we believe in, things we tell ourselves. We believe in stories here. We believe in this United States. We may believe in capitalism or free markets or you name your religion, right? We are a storytelling sapien, right? A storytelling human, storytelling organism, and we're susceptible to it. That's what gives us the power and the strength to do anything, right? But at the same time, that also makes us incredibly vulnerable. In the human history that's recorded, we know what has told the stories that have created and destroyed systems and societies, right? It's been people. It's been powerful dictators or leadership cabals or popes or religious leaders of all stripes, you name it. In the future, sentient AI is going to be telling stories. And if sentient AI tells us stories that ultimately we believe, then the game could be over before we even know what has happened, right? So that is tremendously powerful and very distressing. And that also, when I see the kind of kindergarten AI that's been used in the last couple of election cycles to incredible power, I say to myself, oh my goodness, what happens when the machines, which are already so much smarter than us, what happens when they start playing a role? Well, first of all, free speech for humans, not free speech for robots. Let's all agree on that. Confirmation bias, by the way, also feeds the echo chambers that we wind up in, right? That's why I have certain friends at certain places. That's why I go to certain chat rooms, whatever. At the same time, Dunning-Kruger. You guys have probably heard this one, right? It's very fun, Dunning-Kruger. This one is about the internet makes everybody an expert, right? My friend from high school who has no medical training whatsoever is telling me what's wrong with COVID vaccines and so on and so forth. Everyone becomes an expert in foreign relations, in diplomacy, in medicine, science, you name it, right? The internet enables that to happen. And that's just with good information. With bad information, it's even worse. I mean, with good information, we have well-meaning people saying all kinds of awful things because they don't really know what they're doing, right? They're unqualified to be making these sorts of judgments with the information they have. When the information is bad, it gets even worse. The erosion of bedrock institutions. Now, I mentioned this before, and I won't go into it a lot, but that's what's happened, right? That graph that showed the decline in trust in news media, that graph is the same, almost the same, for Congress, for church, for schools, for public education, for the president, whoever that may be, for police officers, medical systems, you name it. The age of distrust, the age of cynicism. And even worse, as I already mentioned, that trust seems to ebb and flow now with a partisan input. That's a potent combination that's very distressing. Virality of extremes, the information algorithm, absolutely huge. And I've talked about it already a lot, but this is one of the key boxes we need to unlock, right? We have systems information systems that make a tremendous amount of money, most powerful we've ever seen, and a big part of how they do it is with virality, right? Virality in some ways sounds great, right? It's the democratization of information. Virality means I share it with you. We all get to share. But what's charged for virality is the most degrading information, typically. Disinformation's power of proliferation. A lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. Anyone remember that quote? That's a Mark Twain quote, right? That's what I thought. I looked it up, it's not. Yes, rejoice in the irony. Absence of guidance or intervention. The social media companies early on, it was, hey, we don't know. We open this up, people talk, they do things, it's free. We don't know, we gotta do it. That was their initial stance. We know that's not the whole story. And I think they're realizing now, Zuckerberg and Musk and others, they're realizing they're gonna have to play their responsibility has grown. And they're going to have to play a role in the solution, whether they like it or not. And frankly, I do believe that they should play a role in the solution. There's technological applications and others. Top-down regulation can work, but often it leads to many, many unintended consequences, especially when we're talking about speech. So I definitely see them, despite being bad actors in so many ways, I see them as being, we might have to drag them to the public square, but they're gonna have to be part of the solution. The blur between opinion and news, extremely clear, we know that. That was the old model. That model has been really laid low. It still sticks on the New York Times. We love it on the New York Times, right? We know that we're getting good news. We're getting stuff that's really professionally reported in most of the pages, and we know the back page is for opinions. And there's all kinds of opinions there. They have conservative ones, progressive ones. Maybe they lean, obviously the editorial page itself, but we know the rules of the game. We don't really know the rules of the game on social media, and there really aren't many rules to the game. And that, by the way, is a huge advantage to the purveyors of disinformation. And then false memory. I don't want to get into this too much, but this is so powerful, right? LaRouche, I gave that story. Think about with the old model when you saw a story in the paper and you read it and it was great and you believed it, whatever it was. The next day there was a correction to that and it was on page 2 or page 3. Maybe you do, maybe you don't see that. Let's just say for argument's sake you do. Okay, you do. Does that wipe your memory clean? Does that mean that nothing happened there? No, right? That stickiness occurs. And that is extremely powerful on social media channels. See, at least those newspapers, they tried. The intent was there. Try to correct the problem. Try to tell the truth. That helps. Certainly not repeat the distruth, right? But now it's a whole different story. Now the whole incentive is about not correcting. And so think about two of the biggest ones I've seen. Think about the Pope. Some kid with crayons made a meme of the Pope like this, and Trump right there, and the Pope endorses Trump, right? Not true, but it worked. Millions and millions and millions of people believe that. And even the ones who don't care, they say don't care, they might even reject the correction. But even if they don't, it still remains. They're still going to associate positively their candidate with the Pope. A similar thing with the Obama birth certificate stuff, right? Tremendous example. We know this, we know the truth here, right? But that will linger forever because it was so viral. It worked so well. That's the power of the new media. With that, I want to go to fear and cancel culture. And this is so modern, so cutting edge. I want to hear from our young people about this. Andrew's done some really good research on this. Andrew, please join us.
Thank you. All right. Great. Get this clipped in. Thanks. That's the magnet. Oh, great. Perfect. Can you guys see me okay? Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. I see a lot of familiar faces here from last time, so I'm really happy to see everyone again. But yeah, as Robert alluded to, I'm going to be covering the topic of fear and cancel culture. These are two things that I think are, really topical in today's discourse, and I think that we can really learn a lot from just learning a little bit more about these two specific ideas in general. But, before I get started, I want to just introduce you guys just one quote right here. I think it's really important. We can use it moving forward for this conversation today. And it is a quote by the influential Irish political philosopher. His name is Edmund Burke. And he said this: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." It's a really interesting quote. I had seen it around social media for many years, and this is a quote I've really just held on to for a long time. So in the spirit of, so when I was putting together this lecture, I was hoping to kind of use this quote as kind of a transition to what we'd be talking about today. But of course, in the spirit of this lecture on misinformation, I gave it a quick Google search just to make sure, all my sources were correct, make sure it was all good. And I'm sure you guys can already tell right now, this quote is not real. Edmund Burke didn't say anything at all about it. No, sorry. But it is what it is. But in many ways, I think that this quote still rings true in so many ways, though. When we look at the era of deep polarization that we have in our country, and we look at our social media sphere and the larger public sphere as a whole, we see so many people today unwilling to, look past the echo chambers that they live in today. The echo chambers that they themselves have created, as Robert alludes to. And, we don't engage with the other side in any meaningful way either. And that's what's really important. And as a result of that, we see division. We see arguments. We see just absolute aggression on both sides in a righteous attempt on both sides to justify and try to determine what is right and what is wrong, what is valid and what is invalid to say. And I think that's something that's, a really important distinction that we need to make right now. To sum it up, right now we see a cancel culture. That's what we're talking about right now, but it really is a culture of canceling other people. It's a culture of fear of the unknown, and because we don't know what it is, we resent it. And as a Gen Z college student, I was born in 2002, this is really the life that I grew up in. I grew up in the age of the smartphone, the age of social media, and of course these are really great, technological advancements. They're amazing. But at the same time, I grew up in the age of fake news, the age of clickbait articles and misleading headlines, and the age of division. And this division is exactly what we see in our world today. Something really interesting I'll share with you. According to a 2022 Pew Research poll, a majority of Americans on both sides of the political spectrum believe the other side is immoral, dishonest, and closed-minded. So it is what it is right there. It's an important distinction to make, honestly. Today, and I think that the big point here is that today, differing sides that do not align with the majority, they aren't tolerated in public discourse anymore. And so that's what leads to the toxicity and the anger that we see in social media. That, as we saw with that poll that I just mentioned, only divides us further. And at the end of the day, we're no greater than where we started. Of course, with talking about the idea of cancel culture, there's obviously some, good reasons why we would need to call it bad behavior. It has its important social purposes, and I can't deny that. But the problem that we see with cancel culture today is that it doesn't allow anyone to really grow. It stifles growth, in fact. And it causes both parties to recede back into the same echo chambers that created those same divisions in the first place. So like I said, we don't really go anywhere with it. And this has, of course, psychological and social implications that I think are really grave to our future. But something that I want to highlight, though, is, just in the research that I've done, I think that cancel culture today isn't necessarily about what gets said or what gets punished, but rather what doesn't get said anymore out of fear. There's like a slight echo of McCarthyism here that I think you guys can kind of allude to, in which people were afraid to engage with others because they were fearful of what would happen if they were attached to ideas that were seen as controversial or wrong at the time. Yeah, and we see this today. I mean, I know I do. I mean, I'll give you an example. So I go to St. Mary's College over in Moraga. I'm studying political science and sociology. I'm actually starting my senior year next week, so hopefully that goes well. But yeah, so I guess going from there, I would consider myself, a left-leaning progressive Democrat. And just based on the demographics of, the Bay Area and just, college campuses in general, most people there would agree with what I have to say. But it wasn't until I started to engage with, students in a more meaningful way that I learned one thing that was really important. And that thing was the diversity that we have in our college campuses. We're actually so much greater than what I thought. I was like, oh, everyone here is probably liberal and Democrat and they believe the same things that I do. In reality, it's just so much more diverse than that. But at the same time, though, people were more afraid than ever to speak out about their disagreements, to bring up what they might believe would cancel them. And that's an important distinction. That's something that I saw as really concerning. This fear of being on the wrong side, it hindered what otherwise could be a flourishing campus sphere for genuine and honest dialogue. And so it was with that realization that, I knew I had to do something about it. I wasn't just going to sit around and just let that discourse never happen. And so I co-founded a club. Thank you for the introduction on what I was doing as well. I co-founded a club on campus called SMC Bridge USA. And this is a group that brings students together across the political divide. And we aim to have good faith conversations, not just arguments over who's right or wrong. We want to take in everyone's perspectives and their own opinions, so that way in the pursuit of truth, we can come to equitable solutions that are, that encompass everyone's views. And I think that's really the heart of how we combat this idea of cancel culture today. And I think it's an important distinction that we have to make today as well. It's humanizing the individual. It's learning to hear their shared experiences and putting politics aside and just getting to the heart of who someone is and learning exactly why they believe the way they do, because I think that's the most important thing. And so just taking it to a broader perspective, though, we can really take a lot away from something as simple as humanizing the individual. But we also need to learn. We need to learn to expose our minds to differing facts and ideas. And this means being aware of our knee-jerk reactions, whenever we see something on social media that we might disagree with, just being aware of it. And this means engaging with others and learning not to fear the other side as well. And this means, ultimately, in the essence of this fake Edmund Burke quote, learning to triumph over evil by seeing everyone as a good person. And it's only with that kind of mentality in mind that we're able to break down the culture, this cancel culture that we see today, and ultimately create a new culture, one of unity, one of acceptance, and one of growth. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Robert. Great.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Always greatly appreciated. Filter bubbles. I'll just say very briefly on this. There was a tremendous investigation by the New York Times, a reporter a couple of years ago, where he went on as the identity of a few people in his community who were on Facebook. And he was able to log in under their identities and experience the filter bubble that they had unwittingly created. And what he saw was a reality that bore almost no resemblance to what he saw in the country today. Essentially, our cities are on fire and the world is going to catastrophe and so forth. This is the kind of thing that in his particular story, he talked about his own grandmother and about how she had been radicalized by the information that she was being dosed with for hours and hours a day on Facebook. These filter bubbles are extremely powerful. The allegory of Plato in the cave comes to mind. So, with that, let's go to slide 8, please. We are at a historical inflection point, absolutely. Democracy itself under assault. Truth objective reality, empiricism, out of fashion, not in vogue. Something that is the falcon cannot hear the falconer, okay? We are in a place where people are confused, and within confusion, that's where greater propaganda can have a greater impact. And it is. It's opening the way for those who want to use disinformation and untruth to whatever ends that they're looking for: profit, power, politics. We face, this is the dark irony, this incredible profusion of information means that we really do face the potential in the 21st century of a new dark age descending upon us, right? Not a dark age like the previous one, where there was a lack of information, a lack of humanism, a lack of access, but a dark age where the profusion of the very information that we think enables us to live a better society leaves us dislocated, disconnected, disenchanted, and ultimately open to any kind of authoritarian regime. Anything could happen. It could be a regime based on new technology. It could be an AI-aided regime. These are the kinds of things, these are the threats that we face in the 21st century. We'll get into more of that next week, by the way. But bringing to heel the anti-democratic beasts that are rampaging among us, it's going to require all of us. And it's going to require us to really go back to our bedrock institutions. We're going to have to remake new ones as well, but we must bolster the ones we have. We have to talk to our congressmen, our senators, our political leaders. We have to support our public schools. We have to support our public libraries. We have to support our public media. And most of all, we have to support the idea that this information ecosystem is not good enough. It has to change in a way that is more edifying to our democracy. Because right now it's flat out dangerous. The tech companies do play a role in the solution. Democratic accountability plays a role in the solution. Leadership matters. Journalism matters. Thought leadership, business leadership. To echo Murrow, all this technology is only as powerful as we who use it. We can, as a democratic society, we can make it better. We have to no longer reward leaders in any realm who profit and traffic in the kinds of ruinous communications that we've already been talking about. We have to take a stand, and that begins with each of us being savvy and educated news consumers, and I think everybody in this room pretty well is. So teach one. Talk to others around you. Write to your congressman, right? Say, we need to make changes. Just understanding that the world faces a lot of danger. Climate change, proliferation of nuclear weapons, authoritarian regimes, sentient AI. There's all kinds of big threats. But let's not forget, the threats to our democracy are just as grave. And they need just as much of our attention. I didn't hear a lot of that in mainstream political discourse, with the exception of Pete Buttigieg to some degree. He did a little bit of that. But we need to hear more of that. And that starts with us. When we push that narrative, our elected leaders will respond. Our democracy is under assault. If we understand that, that's the first step in making a move. Now, next week, let's get the tools to fight back. With that, let's go to Q&A. Anyone have any? Please.
As you talked a lot about print and such, I didn't hear much about NPR, for example.
Oh,
some of us
terrific.
On NPR for numbers.
And this is going to be a lightning round Q&A because of our time constraints, right? Thank you for bringing that up. And I think that it's a tremendous model. NPR, right? Now, granted, there are those who don't trust that, right? But that's okay. That's okay. The key is the model, the concept. It does work. What we need to be thinking about is public media for social media, right? Public media for the internet, something to that effect, right? We need policy innovations that are going to be part. But the bottom line is, do we need a way where there is resource support for that kind of truth-enhancing media that is in these spaces? Absolutely. So my point is, public media has absolutely been a nourishing aspect of our democracy and our news ecosystem for 100 years. Since the 60s, I guess. And it should be for the next 100. Next.
Support them, but I have a question.
Yes, yes.
On that graph that you had up there, I wasn't sure exactly where cable news
bring the graph.
came into it. Cable news, right? I mean, I don't
Absolutely.
even know when CNN started, and then it was MSNBC, and then it was Fox, and
The graph.
yeah,
Oh,
the graph.
The longitudinal study. Yeah, it certainly plays a role. You see acceleration.
It's right here, yeah.
I mean, it's a steady decline. There's not a really severe peak, but absolutely, does cable news play a role in this polluted ecosystem? Absolutely, right? And that's part of that profit model for news. And you see the kind of news that you get when you fill it for 24 hours, and you have to really, I mean, the ethics strain under the profit motive of having to get those eyeballs. That's part of why public media is an important part of the news ecosystem, of the ingredient mix. Yes?
Why can't they just bring back that fairness doctrine that you were talking about?
Yep.
I mean, it's basic.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's a great question. The fairness doctrine was extremely effective. I'm a big fan, right? However, do I think that it can work in today's amorphous, in some ways inscrutable, totally democratic, completely unregulated news environment? Do I think that rehabbing that kind of policy onto and grafting it onto our current technology situation, do I think that could work? I don't. Go ahead.
Did that come into place though because of the same issues that
Sure.
you're getting?
87, right? Continues
Well,
going on.
the fairness doctrine, it came in the 30s from what I understand, right?
Oh, sure.
Under Roosevelt, right?
So we don't have the data back then, but we know that the post-World War era, all the way to the 70s, was very high, with a little bit of a peak at the 70s. So we know that. So it was definitely part of a healthier news environment in some ways, right? One that really prioritized truth and objectivity and fairness. It was very good. How do you graft a regulation like that onto the current news environment when everyone can have a platform? And we can't stop everyone from having a platform. Now, there's some Western, I apologize. There are some Western democracies that have, in America, we have the First Amendment. And I don't want to get rid of that. I think it's vital to what's made us an incredible republic, one that has done things in world history that are irreplaceable. I don't see how a fairness doctrine on today's social media, deplatformed, democratic, anyone can play a role in the public square. I don't see how you can regulate that.
But that was brought in because of misinformation as
Yes,
well, though.
yes. But back then you have to regulate who has the license of a television station and a newspaper. That's it, right? If I want to run around with my leaflet, I still can do it despite the fairness doctrine. Well, today, the people who have 100,000 followers on Twitter, they're running around with leaflets. I don't think we could stamp them down with a fairness doctrine.
But we had three
Channels.
TV
Oh,
networks.
Yeah.
Today, you have
to start.
thousands.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to start somewhere.
It's a good question, yes. And that might be part of it. No, don't be sorry. I love it. I've looked at it. I've thought about it. I'm inspired by it. I just can't figure out how it could work. I just can't. Others,
Well, it's,
please.
I don't know where to start. I mean, everything that's been said makes a lot of sense, but you've given a lot of tools, but I don't really see the solution because it really comes down to nowadays, to politics. You say to write your congressmen and senators and say, we need you to do something about this, whether it's, reining in artificial intelligence enough to hold the companies that are the experts in that responsible to say that a human always needs to be behind this. It's that kind of thing too. The Googles and the Facebooks of the world, and Elon Musk. I mean, they are extremely powerful, and they can do something about this. Musk says we need to be regulated. He says artificial intelligence needs to be regulated. And
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we need to be regulated.
Andrew, could you bring up the slide?
So
This just happened today. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You were inspiring me to such a great degree. You are absolutely right. Today, Elon Musk. Don't we love when the biggest tech bros on earth go at each other? That's nice, right? Yeah. But anyway, no, absolutely crucial, right? We, newsmakers, news organizations, scientists, we don't even know how Facebook works. We don't know how this $1 trillion market capitalization company has manipulated the world to such a great degree. And by the way, I didn't even get into it, but there's other reasons. The Facebook that we see in America is much different than the Facebook that people are seeing, especially in emerging or developing countries. It's really scary. Go ahead.
No, just with all this, this term fake news is everybody knows this term fake news now,
Yes.
right? So I'm just surprised that if this is public information, how is it that people don't question Facebook? I mean, I'm not on Facebook, I don't read it, but.
Yeah.
I mean, if this is so much in the public, conversation, why don't people understand that Facebook is not reliable?
Well, it might have something to do with some of the mammalian brain issues that we talked about earlier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, listen, here's the key. I want to wrap with this. Do not despair. Do not despair about our fellow humans and our inability. Do not despair about our policy inaction or the gears of democracy grinding to a halt, because they kind of have. We've seen these challenges before. We've adapted before. We can do this. After every wrong thing is tried, we may get it right. Now, what does policy innovation, powered by democratic backlash, what does that look like in a way that enhances our news ecosystem and restarts our ability to be informed and engaged and hopeful democratic citizens? What does that look like? Well, we're going to have a basket of policy options that we're going to talk about, we're going to go through next time, and we're also going to have a basket of personal and familial tools that are going to help us be girded against it. So let's start with ourselves. Let's get stronger. Let's not be susceptible to these kinds of ruses. And let's build with that strength. Let's think about how we are voting for, reaching out to, lobbying for, and talking to institutions and leaders within our democratic societies and telling them, no, no, no. This is not good enough. This is hurting us and is going to leave us behind. America must do better. We will do better. I believe absolutely that not only will we be able to modify and win this threat, I believe we'll lead the world in the way we do it. And that's a bold claim compared to where we are right now. But I think we will. With that, let's call it a night.